The sun hung high over the city streets as Danny Morrison drove his patrol car through the downtown area. He had been a police officer for 15 years and thought he had seen everything there was to see. The radio crackled with routine calls, but nothing that required his immediate attention. He turned onto the main street where shops lined both sides and people walked along the sidewalks going about their daily business. That was when he saw him. An older black man walking slowly down the street, wearing what appeared to be a military dress uniform. The uniform was dark blue with gold trim and covered in ribbons and medals that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Danny squinted and leaned forward in his seat to get a better look. Something about the display seemed off to him. There were too many decorations and the medals looked too elaborate to be real. Danny had dealt with stolen valor cases before. People who pretended to be military heroes when they had never served a day in their lives. It disgusted him every time. Real soldiers fought and died for their country while frauds walked around in uniforms they had not earned, seeking praise and recognition they did not deserve. This looked like exactly that kind of situation. He pulled his patrol car to the curb and got out. The man continued walking with a slight limp, heading toward the large plaza at the end of the street. Danny could see that a stage had been set up there, and workers were arranging chairs and testing microphones. Some kind of event was about to take place. Danny quickened his pace and called out to the man. The veteran stopped and turned around slowly. His face showed the lines and wrinkles of someone who had lived a long life. His eyes were calm and patient. The name tag on his uniform read, Williams. Despite his age, the man stood perfectly straight with his shoulders back in a military posture. Danny walked up to him with his hand resting on his belt near his equipment. He looked the man up and down, examining the uniform more closely. The ribbons were arranged in neat rows and the medals hung precisely where they should be. But that meant nothing to Danny. Anyone could buy these things online or at a surplus store. The older man spoke first in a deep, calm voice. He asked if there was a problem. Danny crossed his arms and told him there might be. He said he needed to ask a few questions about the uniform and the medals. The man nodded and said he understood. Danny asked where the man had served. The veteran replied that he had served in the United States Space Force across multiple tours in the outer colonies. Danny felt his suspicion grow stronger. Space Force, outer colonies. It all sounded too grand and too convenient. Danny told the man he found it hard to believe. He asked if the man had any documentation to prove his service. The veteran said his papers were at home, but that he was expected at the ceremony that was about to begin at the plaza. Danny shook his head. He had heard every excuse in the book from people trying to get out of trouble. A few people walking by began to slow down and watch the interaction. Danny noticed but did not care. He was doing his job, and if people wanted to watch, then that was fine with him. He told the veteran that wearing military decorations without having earned them was a federal crime. The man could face serious charges. The veteran remained calm. He said his name was Marcus Williams and that Danny was making a mistake. He asked the officer to please verify his information before taking any action. Danny felt a flash of anger. This man was trying to tell him how to do his job. He had been an officer for 15 years and knew exactly what he was doing. Danny reached for his handcuffs and told Marcus Williams that he needed to come down to the station. Marcus did not resist. He simply held out his wrists and allowed Danny to place the cuffs on him. The crowd that had gathered grew larger and several people had their phones out recording everything that was happening. A young woman pushed forward from the crowd. She shouted at Danny, asking if he knew who he was arresting. Danny told her to step back and let him do his job. The woman looked upset and tried to explain something, but Danny waved her away. He did not need interference from civilians. As Danny led Marcus toward his patrol car, the older man spoke quietly. He said that General Patricia Hayes was expecting him at the ceremony in less than 30 minutes. He was supposed to give a speech. Danny almost laughed. Now the story was getting even more ridiculous. A general was waiting for him. Sure she was. Danny opened the back door of his car and helped Marcus inside. The veteran moved slowly because of his age and the limp. Once Marcus was seated, Danny closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. The crowd was talking among themselves, and some people looked angry. One man shouted that Danny was making a huge mistake, but the officer ignored him. Danny got into his car and radioed the station. He told them he was bringing in a suspected stolen valor case. The dispatcher acknowledged and told him to proceed. Danny pulled away from the curb and headed back toward the precinct. In the rearview mirror, he could see Marcus sitting quietly in the back seat, looking out the window with an expression that seemed more sad than worried. During the drive, Danny felt confident about what he had done. He had seen the signs and acted appropriately. The uniform was too perfect. The medals were too numerous. The story was too elaborate. Everything pointed to this being a fraud. He would take Marcus to the station and run his information through the system. When nothing came up or when the information did not match, Danny would have his evidence. The man would be charged and justice would be served. Marcus did not speak during the entire ride. He sat in silence with his hands cuffed in front of him. Danny glanced back a few times, but the older man simply stared out the window as the city passed by. There was something about his demeanor that Danny found unusual. Most people who got arrested were either angry or scared. They argued or pleaded, but Marcus Williams showed neither emotion. He seemed almost resigned, as if he had expected this to happen. They arrived at the police station 15 minutes later. Danny parked in the back lot and helped Marcus out of the vehicle. The veteran moved stiffly, and Danny noticed how the handcuffs seemed to cause him discomfort. For a brief moment, Danny felt a small twinge of doubt, but he pushed it aside. The man was a suspect, and suspects got handcuffed. That was procedure. Danny led Marcus through the back entrance of the station and into the main processing area. Several other officers looked up from their desks as they walked by. A few nodded at Danny in acknowledgement. He felt proud bringing in this case. Stolen valor was serious, and catching someone in the act was something the department took seriously. He took Marcus to an interrogation room. The small space had a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs. Danny removed the handcuffs and told Marcus to sit down. The older man rubbed his wrists where the metal had pressed against his skin and took a seat. Danny sat across from him and pulled out a notepad. The questioning began with basic information. Danny asked for the full name and Marcus provided it clearly. Marcus Andrew Williams. Danny wrote it down. Then he asked for a service number. Marcus recited a long string of numbers and letters without hesitation. That meant nothing to Danny. Anyone could make up a service number. Danny asked about rank and unit. Marcus said he had retired as a colonel and had commanded the Orbital Defense Platform Guardian Station. Danny wrote it all down, but inside he was shaking his head. The story was getting more elaborate with each answer. An orbital defense platform, a colonel. It all seemed designed to impress. Then Danny asked about the medals. He wanted to know what each one was supposed to represent. Marcus began to explain each ribbon and decoration in detail. He spoke about campaigns in the asteroid belt and defensive operations around the moons of Jupiter. He mentioned battles against the Calros Confederation and peacekeeping missions in the outer colonies. The more Marcus talked, the more Danny became convinced this was all fantasy. Danny stood up and told Marcus to wait. He left the interrogation room and went to his desk in the main office area. He sat down at his computer and began typing in the information Marcus had provided. The database search started running, and Danny expected it to come back empty, or to show that the real Marcus Williams was someone completely different. But as the search progressed, something strange happened. Results began appearing on the screen. Danny leaned closer. There was a file for Marcus Andrew Williams with the service number that matched exactly what Marcus had told him. Danny clicked on the file to open it. Immediately, warning messages appeared. Classification markers covered the screen. Restricted access. Level 4 clearance required. Danny only had Level 2 clearance as a local police officer. He could see some basic information, but most of the file was blocked. What he could see, however, made his mouth go dry. The summary section showed Marcus Williams listed as a retired colonel. The service dates matched what Marcus had said. There were references to multiple commendations and decorations, but the details were classified. Danny stared at the screen, trying to process what he was seeing. This could not be right, could it? He clicked through different screens, trying to find more information. Each page showed more classification warnings. Then he saw something that made his heart skip. In the list of decorations, there was one that stood out above all the others. Medal of Honor, Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration that could be awarded. Danny sat back in his chair, feeling dizzy. The Medal of Honor was not something given out lightly. It was reserved for acts of extraordinary heroism in combat. Only a handful of people received it each decade. If Marcus Williams really had the Medal of Honor, then everything Danny thought he knew was wrong. The door to the captain's office opened, and Captain Sheila Rodriguez stepped out. She was a stern woman in her late 40s who ran the precinct with firm discipline. She looked around the office and her eyes landed on Danny. Her expression was dark and angry. She walked directly toward him. Danny stood up as she approached. Captain Rodriguez stopped in front of his desk and asked him in a low voice to explain what he had done. Danny started to answer, but she cut him off. She told him to follow her to her office immediately. Her tone left no room for argument. Inside her office, Captain Rodriguez closed the door and turned to face Danny. She asked him if he had any idea what he had just done. Danny tried to explain about seeing the uniform and the medals and how it looked like stolen valor. The captain held up her hand to stop him. She told him that the man sitting in the interrogation room was not a fraud. She said his name was Colonel Marcus Williams and he was a legitimate war hero. Danny tried to interrupt, but she kept talking. She said Marcus had not only served with distinction, but had received the Medal of Honor for his actions during the Battle of Europa 15 years ago. Danny felt the blood drain from his face. The Battle of Europa was famous. Every schoolchild learned about it. The Calros fleet had broken through Earth's outer defenses and was heading straight for the planet. Only a few ships and stations stood in their way. The fighting had been brutal and desperate. Captain Rodriguez pulled up a holographic display from her computer. Images appeared in the air showing a massive space station surrounded by enemy ships. The station was firing from every weapon port even as explosions tore through sections of its hull. She explained that this was Guardian Station during the battle. She told Danny that when the station was crippled and life support was failing, Marcus Williams had been ordered to evacuate, but he refused. He and 17 volunteers stayed behind to hold off the enemy fleet. They fought for 6 hours, buying time for reinforcements to arrive. Only 3 of them survived. Marcus Williams was one of those 3. Danny could not speak. He stared at the images floating in the air. The captain continued. She said that because of Marcus and those who stayed with him, Earth had been saved. Billions of lives were protected because a handful of people refused to abandon their posts. That was why Marcus Williams had been awarded the Medal of Honor. The captain turned off the display and looked at Danny with barely controlled fury. She asked him why he had not verified the information before making an arrest, why he had not asked for identification or called the station for a records check, why he had assumed the worst without any evidence. Danny stood in the captain's office feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He tried to find words to explain his actions, but everything he thought to say sounded hollow and inadequate. Captain Rodriguez was waiting for an answer, and her expression showed that she expected the truth. He admitted that he had made assumptions based on what he saw. He said the uniform looked too decorated and the story seemed too elaborate when Marcus mentioned serving in the Space Force. Captain Rodriguez shook her head slowly. She told him that his assumptions had led to a massive mistake. A mistake that was already spreading beyond the walls of the police station. She turned her computer screen toward Danny. On it was a social media feed showing multiple videos of the arrest. The footage had been taken by people in the crowd and was now being shared thousands of times. The comments were filled with outrage and anger. People were demanding answers and calling for Danny to be fired. Some were calling the arrest an example of racial profiling and discrimination. Danny felt sick to his stomach. He had not thought about race when he made the arrest. At least he did not think he had. But looking at the situation from the outside, he could see how it appeared. An older black man in a military uniform stopped and arrested by a white police officer who assumed he was committing fraud. The optics were terrible. Captain Rodriguez told him that the mayor's office had already called. So had the media. News crews were setting up outside the station. The story was growing bigger by the minute. She said that in less than an hour this would be national news and the department would be facing serious questions about its practices and training. She asked Danny what he thought they should do now. He suggested releasing Marcus immediately and apologizing. The captain nodded but said it went deeper than that. She explained that Marcus Williams had been scheduled to speak at a ceremony honoring the anniversary of the Battle of Europa. General Patricia Hayes herself had traveled to the city to attend. The ceremony was supposed to start in 10 minutes and the keynote speaker was sitting in an interrogation room in handcuffs. Danny closed his eyes. Everything Marcus had told him was true. The ceremony, The general, all of it, and Danny had dismissed every word as lies. He asked the captain what she wanted him to do. She told him to go release Marcus immediately and offer a formal apology. Then she said Danny would be placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into the incident. Danny walked back to the interrogation room feeling like he was moving through water. Everything seemed to slow down around him. He opened the door and saw Marcus still sitting calmly at the table. The older man looked up as Danny entered, but his expression remained neutral. Danny approached the table and stood there for a moment, struggling to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. He said he owed Marcus an apology. He had made a terrible mistake and had no excuse for his actions. He told Marcus he was free to go and that the handcuffs should never have been placed on him in the first place. Marcus stood slowly. He looked at Danny with those calm, patient eyes and asked if the officer had verified his service record. Danny nodded and said he had. He admitted that he should have done that before making the arrest. Marcus asked why he had not. Danny did not have a good answer. The question hung in the air between them. Why had Danny not checked first? Why had he assumed the worst? What was it about seeing Marcus in that uniform that made him so certain it was fraud? Danny knew the answer, but saying it out loud was difficult. He had made a judgment based on appearance and assumption rather than facts and evidence. Marcus told Danny that he understood the officer thought he was doing his job. But he said that assumptions were dangerous, especially when they involved people's lives and reputations. He said that Danny had the power to arrest and detain people. With that power came the responsibility to use it fairly and justly. Making assumptions without verification was neither fair nor just. Danny felt the weight of those words. He escorted Marcus out of the interrogation room and through the station. Other officers watched as they passed. Some looked confused. Others looked away as if ashamed. Word had spread quickly through the building about who Marcus really was. At the front entrance of the station, Danny held the door open for Marcus. Outside, a crowd had gathered. News cameras were pointed at the building. Reporters shouted questions. Danny stepped back instinctively, but Marcus walked out into the chaos with his head held high. A black car was waiting at the curb. The door opened and a woman in a military uniform stepped out. She wore the stars of a general on her shoulders. This was General Patricia Hayes. She walked directly to Marcus and saluted him crisply. Marcus returned the salute with precision. The general asked if Marcus was all right. He said he was fine, just a misunderstanding. The general turned and looked at the police station with an expression that could have melted steel. She said it was more than a misunderstanding. It was a disgrace. She told Marcus they needed to get to the ceremony, but that this matter was far from over. Danny watched from the doorway as Marcus got into the car. Before the door closed, Marcus looked back at him. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Then the door shut and the car pulled away, heading toward the plaza where thousands of people were waiting. Captain Rodriguez appeared beside Danny. She told him to go home. The administrative leave was effective immediately. He needed to turn in his badge and weapon. Danny nodded numbly. He went back inside to his desk and began removing his equipment. His hands shook as he placed his badge on the desk. Other officers kept their distance. No one wanted to be associated with what had happened. Danny felt completely alone. He had been so sure of himself just an hour ago. So confident that he was right. Now everything had fallen apart and he had no one to blame but himself. He left the station through the back exit to avoid the media. His personal car was in the lot. He got in and sat there for a long time staring at nothing. His phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls, but he did not look at it. He did not want to see what people were saying about him. Eventually he started the car and drove home. The street seemed different somehow. People walking on the sidewalks. Cars passing by. Everything looked the same but felt changed. Danny realized that he was seeing the world differently now. Or perhaps he was seeing himself differently within it. Danny spent the rest of the day at home watching the news coverage of what he had done. Every major network was running the story. The videos of the arrest played over and over. Commentary from experts discussed police training and racial bias. Veterans groups issued statements condemning the incident. Social media was filled with demands for accountability. He saw himself on the screen approaching Marcus on the street. He watched himself place the handcuffs on the older man. The videos showed the crowd gathering and people trying to intervene. Danny had dismissed them all. He had been so certain he was right that he had ignored everyone trying to tell him otherwise. The news anchors interviewed military historians who explained the significance of the Medal of Honor. They showed footage from the Battle of Europa, actual combat recordings from Guardian Station during those 6 desperate hours. Danny watched ships exploding and weapons firing. He saw the station taking hit after hit but continuing to fight. The images were overwhelming. One expert explained that of the 18 people who stayed on Guardian Station, 15 had died. Their names were read aloud. Young men and women from all over Earth who had volunteered to stay behind, knowing they would probably not survive. Marcus Williams had been their commander. He had made the choice to stay and his crew had followed him. Danny learned details he had never known. After the battle, Marcus had spent 2 months in a military hospital, recovering from his injuries. He had attended 15 funerals for the crew members who did not make it home. At the Medal of Honor ceremony, the president had placed the ribbon around Marcus's neck, while the families of the fallen watched. Marcus had said in his acceptance speech that the medal belonged to all 18 people who stayed on Guardian Station, not just to him. The news coverage showed clips from that ceremony 15 years ago. A younger Marcus Williams standing at attention as the citation was read. The words described extraordinary heroism and selfless sacrifice. They described a commander who refused to abandon his post even when ordered to do so, who inspired his crew to acts of incredible valor, who saved Earth from certain destruction. Danny turned off the television. He could not watch anymore. He sat in silence in his living room as the sun set outside his windows. His phone continued to buzz, but he ignored it. He knew what the messages would say. Some would be from friends and family trying to reach him. Others would be from strangers telling him what they thought of him. None of it would help. That night he could not sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day.
He kept seeing Marcus's face as he put the handcuffs on him.
The calm, patient expression, the disappointment in his eyes. Marcus had not been angry or afraid. He had simply looked sad, as if he had seen this kind of thing before and knew exactly how it would go. Danny thought about his 15 years as a police officer. He had always believed he was fair and just. He treated everyone the same regardless of who they were. At least that was what he told himself. But now he had to question that belief. Had there been other times when he made assumptions based on appearance? How many people had he stopped or questioned because of how they looked rather than what they had done? The next morning, Danny woke early and checked the news. The story was still the top headline. New developments had emerged overnight. The mayor had called for a full investigation into the police department's training procedures. Civil rights groups were demanding reforms. A protest was planned for later in the week. There was also news about the ceremony. It had gone on as scheduled, with Marcus Williams giving the keynote speech. Thousands had attended to honor the anniversary of the Battle of Europa and to remember those who had sacrificed everything. The speech had been powerful and moving according to reports. Marcus had spoken about duty and honor and the price of freedom. Danny read the transcript of the speech online. Marcus had talked about each of the 15 people who died on Guardian Station. He told stories about who they were and what they cared about. He described their bravery and their humanity. He said that heroes were not perfect people but ordinary individuals who chose to do extraordinary things when the moment demanded it. Near the end of the speech, Marcus had mentioned what happened earlier that day. He did not give details, but he said he had been reminded that the fight for justice and equality was not just fought in space against alien enemies. It was fought every day in streets and communities right here on Earth. He said that real heroism was not just about grand battles, but about how people treated each other in everyday moments. Danny felt tears on his face as he read those words. Marcus could have used the speech to condemn him publicly. He could have named Danny and demanded punishment. Instead, he had turned the incident into a teaching moment about broader issues. Even after being wrongly arrested, Marcus Williams maintained his dignity and grace. The doorbell rang, interrupting Danny's thoughts. He was not expecting anyone and considered not answering. But the bell rang again, so he went to the door. Through the peephole, he saw Captain Rodriguez standing on his porch. He opened the door. The captain looked tired, as if she had not slept much either. She asked if she could come in. Danny stepped aside and let her enter. They sat in his living room, and for a moment neither spoke. Finally, Captain Rodriguez told him that the department was under intense scrutiny. The investigation into his actions would be thorough and public. There would likely be consequences beyond the administrative leave. Danny nodded. He had expected as much. But then the captain said something unexpected. She told him that General Hayes had contacted the department. The general had requested a meeting with Danny. She wanted to speak with him directly. Danny asked why. The captain said she did not know, but that the general had been very clear about wanting the meeting to happen soon. Danny did not understand. Why would a general want to meet with him? Why would she waste her time on the officer who had arrested and humiliated a war hero? Captain Rodriguez said she had asked the same questions, but the general had not provided details. She simply insisted that the meeting take place. The captain handed Danny a slip of paper with an address and a time. The meeting was scheduled for the following day at a location downtown. She told him it was not an order since he was on leave, but that she strongly recommended he attend. Danny looked at the paper and agreed to go. He had no idea what to expect, but felt he owed it to everyone involved to at least show up. After the captain left, Danny spent the rest of the day preparing himself mentally. He did not know what General Hayes would say to him. Perhaps she wanted to express her anger directly. Perhaps she wanted to ensure he faced maximum consequences. Whatever the reason, Danny decided he would face it with honesty. He would not make excuses or try to defend what he had done. The address Captain Rodriguez had given Danny led to a conference room in a government building downtown. He arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the lobby waiting. His palms were sweating and his heart raced. He had faced dangerous situations as a police officer, but none of them made him as nervous as this meeting. At exactly the appointed time, a young officer in military uniform approached him. The officer asked if he was Danny Morrison. Danny confirmed and was led down a hallway to a large conference room. The door was open, and inside he could see several people seated around a long table. General Patricia Hayes sat at the head of the table. She was a striking woman with sharp features and an air of absolute authority. Next to her sat Marcus Williams in his dress uniform. Several other military officials were present, along with a few civilians Danny did not recognize. Everyone turned to look at him as he entered. The general gestured to an empty chair. Danny sat down, feeling like he was facing a tribunal. General Hayes introduced herself formally, then introduced the others around the table. There were 2 other colonels, a major, and 3 people from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The atmosphere was serious and formal. General Hayes began by thanking everyone for coming. She said the purpose of this meeting was to address what had happened 2 days ago and to discuss how to move forward. She looked directly at Danny and asked him to explain in his own words what occurred and why he made the decisions he did. Danny took a breath and began speaking. He described seeing Marcus on the street and his immediate suspicion about the uniform and medals. He explained that he had encountered stolen Valor cases before and thought this was another one. He admitted that he made assumptions without verifying any information first. He said there was no excuse for his actions and that he took full responsibility. The general listened without interrupting. When Danny finished, she asked him why he had been so certain it was stolen Valor. What specifically made him suspicious? Danny struggled with the answer. He said the uniform seemed too decorated. The story about serving in the Space Force sounded elaborate. But even as he said these things, he knew they were not the real reasons. One of the civilians at the table spoke up. She introduced herself as a professor who studied implicit bias in law enforcement. She asked Danny if he would have made the same assumptions if Marcus had been white. The question hit hard. Danny wanted to say yes, but he could not be certain. He admitted that race might have played a role in his judgment even if he was not consciously aware of it at the time. Marcus spoke for the first time since Danny entered the room. He said that he appreciated Danny's honesty. He explained that this was not the first time something like this had happened to him. Over the years, he had been stopped, questioned, and doubted numerous times despite his service record and decorations. Each incident was different, but the pattern was the same. People saw him and made assumptions. He told a story about going to a formal military dinner 5 years ago. Security at the entrance had refused to believe he was a colonel and an invited guest. They thought he was trying to sneak in. It took 3 phone calls and 20 minutes before they finally let him through. He had missed the opening remarks, and his seat at the head table remained empty during that time. Another time he had been shopping in his dress uniform after attending a memorial service. A man had confronted him in the parking lot, accusing him of disrespecting real veterans. The man had followed him to his car shouting insults. Marcus had simply gotten in his vehicle and driven away without responding. He said these experiences were exhausting and demoralizing, but he had learned to expect them. Danny listened to these stories, feeling worse with each one. He had added to that burden. He had been one more person who looked at Marcus Williams and saw a fraud instead of a hero. One more person who made assumptions based on prejudice rather than evidence. General Hayes explained that the purpose of this meeting was not to punish Danny, but to educate. She said the military had learned hard lessons about bias and discrimination over the years. They had implemented extensive training and accountability measures. Law enforcement needed to learn the same lessons. This incident could be a catalyst for change if handled correctly. She proposed that Danny participate in a comprehensive training program focused on implicit bias, community relations, and proper procedures. The program would last 3 months and would involve both classroom work and community engagement. Upon completion, Danny would be required to share what he learned with other officers and help develop new training materials for the department. Danny agreed immediately. He said he wanted to do whatever was necessary to ensure this never happened again, not just to him but to any officer. General Hayes nodded approvingly. She said there would also be a public component. Danny would need to speak at community forums and be open about his mistakes and what he learned from them. This made Danny uncomfortable, but he understood why it was necessary. The incident had been public. The response needed to be public as well. He could not hide from what he had done. He needed to face it directly and demonstrate real change. Marcus spoke again. He said that he had one condition for supporting this plan. He wanted to be personally involved in Danny's training. He wanted to spend time with him and share his experiences. He wanted Danny to understand not just intellectually, but emotionally what it felt like to be constantly doubted and disrespected, despite having earned honor and recognition. Danny looked at Marcus surprised. After everything that had happened, Marcus was willing to spend more time with him, to invest effort in his education. It seemed like more grace than Danny deserved. He asked Marcus why he would do this. Marcus said it was because he believed people could change. He had seen it happen before. He said that holding on to anger and resentment did not help anyone. But working toward understanding and growth could make a real difference. The general laid out a detailed plan for the training program. Danny would spend 1 day each week with Marcus visiting different communities and veteran organizations. He would attend bias training workshops run by experts. He would read assigned materials and write reflections on what he learned. He would meet regularly with the professor who specialized in implicit bias. At the end of 3 months, there would be a final evaluation. If Danny successfully completed the program, he could return to active duty, but he would do so with new responsibilities. He would become a trainer himself, teaching other officers about bias and proper procedures. He would be a resource for the department on issues related to community relations and fair policing. Danny felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was being proposed. But he also felt grateful. He was being given an opportunity to grow and to help others avoid making the same mistakes. It would not be easy. He would have to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and society. But it was necessary work and he was ready to do it. The first day of training began the following Monday. Danny met Marcus at a community center in a predominantly black neighborhood on the south side of the city. The building was old but well-maintained with colorful murals painted on the outside walls. Children played in a nearby park while older residents sat on benches talking. Marcus was waiting outside when Danny arrived. He greeted Danny with a handshake and led him inside. The community center hosted a weekly gathering for local veterans. About 30 people were present, ranging in age from their 20s to their 80s. They sat in a circle of folding chairs drinking coffee and sharing stories. Marcus introduced Danny to the group. He explained what had happened and why Danny was there. The reaction was mixed. Some people nodded in understanding. Others crossed their arms and looked skeptical. A few seemed angry. Danny could not blame any of them. An older man named Calvin spoke first. He was a Vietnam veteran who had served in the Army for 20 years. He said he had been stopped by police more times than he could count. Sometimes for legitimate reasons, but often for nothing more than being black, in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. He described being pulled over while driving home from his own retirement ceremony, still wearing his dress uniform. The officer had accused him of stealing the car. A younger woman named Lisa shared her experience. She had served 3 tours in the Middle East before the Calross Wars began. She said that when she came home, people questioned whether she had really been in combat. They assumed she must have had a desk job or worked in support roles. When she wore her uniform, people stared at her with confusion or suspicion. She said it felt like she had to constantly prove her service was real. One by one, the veterans shared their stories. Each account added another layer to Danny's understanding. These were not isolated incidents. They were patterns that had repeated across decades and generations. The veterans in this room had sacrificed for their country, but still faced doubt and discrimination when they came home. Marcus asked Danny to share what he was learning. Danny spoke about his growing awareness of his own biases. He admitted that he had not realized how his assumptions affected his actions. He said he was beginning to understand that good intentions were not enough. Without awareness and active effort to counteract bias, even well-meaning people could cause harm. After the meeting, several veterans approached Danny individually. Some wanted to share additional stories. Others wanted to ask questions about police procedures. A few offered words of encouragement, saying they appreciated his willingness to learn. Danny listened to each person, giving them his full attention. Over the following weeks, Danny attended similar gatherings at different locations. He met veterans from all branches of service and all backgrounds. He heard stories of heroism and sacrifice. He also heard stories of disrespect and discrimination. The contrast was striking and painful. During his second week, Marcus took Danny to a high school where Marcus sometimes spoke to students about military service. The assembly hall was filled with teenagers, who listened as Marcus described his experiences in the Space Force. He showed them pictures from Guardian Station and explained what happened during the Battle of Europa. Afterward, students asked questions. One young black student asked if Marcus had ever faced racism in the military. Marcus answered honestly. He said that while the military had made progress, there were still challenges. He had encountered prejudice and had to work harder than some of his peers to prove himself. But he said the military gave him opportunities he might not have had elsewhere, and he was proud of his service despite the difficulties. Another student asked about the arrest. Word had spread through the school about what happened. Marcus handled the question with grace. He said that mistakes happen, and that what matters is how people respond when they make mistakes. He gestured to Danny sitting in the audience and said that Danny was trying to learn and grow. That took courage and deserved respect. Danny felt emotions welling up inside him. Marcus could have used this moment to embarrass him further. Instead, he was offering understanding and support. It was more than Danny felt he deserved, but he was grateful for it. The training also included formal classroom sessions. Danny attended workshops on implicit bias where he learned about how the human brain makes quick judgments based on limited information. These judgments often rely on stereotypes and cultural assumptions. Everyone has biases, but becoming aware of them allows people to make more conscious choices. He took tests that measured his unconscious associations. The results showed biases he had not been aware of. Seeing them laid out in data was uncomfortable but enlightening. He could no longer deny that his perceptions were influenced by factors beyond his conscious control. The professor who specialized in this work explained that awareness was just the first step. Danny needed to develop strategies to counteract his biases in real time. This meant slowing down his decision-making process, asking questions before jumping to conclusions, seeking additional information rather than relying on first impressions. Danny also studied the history of policing in America. He learned about how law enforcement had been used to enforce segregation and discriminatory laws. He read accounts from communities that had been over-policed and targeted unfairly. He began to understand how historical patterns continued to shape present-day relationships between police and minority communities. One evening, Marcus invited Danny to his home for dinner. The house was modest but comfortable, filled with memories from a long life of service. Pictures on the walls showed Marcus at different stages of his career. There were photos with fellow soldiers and images from various ceremonies. Marcus's wife, Helen, was a gracious host. She had been a military nurse and had her own stories of service. Over dinner, she told Danny about the years she and Marcus had spent moving from base to base, raising their family, while both pursued demanding careers. She spoke about the challenges and the rewards. After dinner, Marcus showed Danny his Medal of Honor. It was kept in a special case in his study. Danny looked at the blue ribbon with white stars and the medal itself hanging below. Marcus explained that he rarely displayed it. He said the medal represented the sacrifice of many people, not just him. Showing it off felt wrong somehow. He told Danny about the day he received it, how he had stood in front of the president and the families of his fallen crew members, how heavy the medal felt when it was placed around his neck. Not because of its physical weight, but because of what it represented. 15 lives lost, 15 families forever changed. The medal was an honor, but also a burden to carry. As the weeks progressed, Danny noticed changes in how he viewed the world around him. He paid attention to his reactions when he saw people on the street. He questioned his assumptions before acting on them. He found himself slowing down and gathering information. Rather than jumping to conclusions, Marcus arranged for Danny to ride along with community outreach officers who had built positive relationships with the neighborhoods they served. Danny saw how these officers interacted with residents. They knew people by name. They attended community events. They had earned trust through consistent, respectful engagement over time. One officer named Luis explained his approach. He said that policing was about more than enforcing laws. It was about being part of the community. When people trusted you, they were more likely to cooperate and less likely to see you as an enemy. But trust had to be earned through actions, not just words. Danny accompanied Luis on his rounds through a neighborhood that had historically had tensions with police. Luis stopped to talk with shop owners and elderly residents sitting on their porches. He asked about their families and listened to their concerns. He was not there to make arrests, but to be present and accessible. A woman named Betty told Luis about some teenagers who had been spray painting graffiti on buildings at night. Instead of immediately treating it as a criminal matter, Luis suggested organizing a community mural project. Give the kids a legal outlet for their artistic expression. Turn potential vandals into community artists. Betty thought it was a good idea and offered to help organize it. Danny watched this interaction and realized how different it was from his own approach. He would have focused on catching the vandals and charging them. Luis was focused on solving the underlying problem and building community relationships. Both approaches had their place, but Danny had relied too heavily on enforcement and not enough on engagement. During his 7th week of training, Danny attended a police accountability forum. Community members shared their experiences with law enforcement, both positive and negative. Some praised officers who had helped them in difficult situations. Others described encounters where they felt disrespected or treated unfairly. A young man named Jerome stood up to speak. He said he had been stopped by police 5 times in the past year while walking in his own neighborhood. Each time the officers demanded to know where he was going and what he was doing. Each time they ran his information looking for warrants. He had never been arrested or charged with anything, but he was tired of being treated like a criminal. Jerome said he understood that police had a job to do, but the constant scrutiny made him feel unwelcome in his own community. He asked why he was stopped so often when his white neighbors could walk the same streets without being questioned. The frustration and pain in his voice were evident. Danny felt compelled to respond. He stood and identified himself. He acknowledged that he had been one of those officers who made assumptions based on appearance. He admitted that people like Jerome had been subjected to unfair treatment because of biases in policing. He said he was working to change, but that change needed to happen at a systemic level, not just individually. The response from the audience was mixed. Some people appreciated his honesty. Others remained skeptical, asking if this was just talk or if real change would follow. Danny could not blame them for their doubts. Trust once broken was hard to rebuild. All he could do was commit to doing better and hope that over time his actions would speak louder than his words. Marcus attended the forum and spoke as well. He said that accountability was essential for any institution to function properly. Without it, abuses of power went unchecked and public trust eroded. He emphasized that most police officers were good people trying to do a difficult job, but that the few who acted badly damaged the reputation of everyone in law enforcement. He proposed that community oversight boards be given more authority to review police actions and recommend changes to policies. He suggested that officers receive ongoing training in bias recognition and community engagement, not just during academy training but throughout their careers. He called for greater transparency in how complaints against officers were handled. After the forum, several community leaders approached Danny. They wanted to know if he was serious about making changes or if this was just for show. Danny assured them he was committed for the long term. One leader named Pastor Franklin said he would be watching. He told Danny that words were easy, but sustained action was what mattered. The next week, Marcus took Danny to visit the families of some of the crew members who had died on Guardian Station. These visits were difficult but important. Danny met parents who had lost children and spouses who had lost partners. Each family had a story about their loved one, what they were like, what they cared about, what they had sacrificed. One mother named Dorothy showed Danny pictures of her son Kenny. He had been 23 when he died on Guardian Station. She said he had always wanted to serve in the military like his grandfather. He had been excited about his assignment to the station. His last message to her before the battle had said that he was honored to serve under Colonel Williams. Dorothy told Danny that Marcus had visited her personally after the battle. He had spent hours with the family telling them about Kenny's bravery and how proud he was to have commanded him. Marcus had attended the funeral and stayed in touch with the family over the years. He called on anniversaries and holidays. He never forgot the people who had served under him. Meeting these families helped Danny understand the true cost of war. The medals and ceremonies honored sacrifice, but behind each one was a family dealing with loss. Marcus carried that weight every day. The Medal of Honor around his neck represented not just his actions, but the lives of those who did not come home. As the 3-month training program neared its end, Danny had to complete a final project. He was required to develop a training module for other officers on recognizing and addressing bias in policing. He worked with the professor and with Marcus to create a comprehensive program. The module included information about implicit bias and its effects. It provided case studies including Danny's own experience with Marcus. It offered practical strategies for officers to check their assumptions before acting. It emphasized the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of circumstances. Danny also included sections on the history of policing and its relationship with minority communities. He wanted officers to understand the context in which they operated, why some communities distrusted police, why building relationships required sustained effort and accountability. He presented the training module to a review board that included General Hayes Marcus and several police officials. The presentation lasted 2 hours and covered every aspect of the program. Danny spoke from personal experience about how his biases had led to a serious mistake and how the training process had changed his perspective. The review board asked challenging questions. They wanted to know how Danny would measure the effectiveness of the training, how he would ensure officers took it seriously, how he would address resistance from those who did not think bias training was necessary. Danny had prepared answers but admitted there were no perfect solutions. Change would take time and persistence. After deliberating, the review board approved Danny's training module and cleared him to return to active duty. But his role would be different from before. He would split his time between regular patrol duties and training other officers. He would also serve as a liaison to community groups working to improve police-community relations. Captain Rodriguez welcomed Danny back to the precinct with cautious optimism. She said the department had made some changes during his absence. New policies required officers to complete additional verification steps before making arrests in certain situations. Body cameras had been upgraded to ensure better documentation of all interactions. A civilian review board had been established to examine complaints against officers. These changes had not been easy. Some officers resisted what they saw as unnecessary bureaucracy. Others worried that the new policies would prevent them from doing their jobs effectively. But the department leadership was committed to reform, and Danny's case had provided the catalyst for action. Danny's first training session with fellow officers was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. 20 officers gathered in the conference room. Some looked interested. Others seemed skeptical or resentful. Danny understood their reactions. No one liked being told they needed to change, especially when they believed they were already doing things correctly. He began by sharing his own story. He described seeing Marcus on the street and the assumptions he had made. He walked through each decision that led to the wrongful arrest. He did not try to excuse his actions or minimize the harm they caused. He spoke honestly about his biases and how they had influenced his judgment. Then he invited Marcus to join the session. When Marcus entered the room wearing his dress uniform complete with the Medal of Honor, several officers stood instinctively to attention. Marcus asked them to sit and be comfortable. He said he was there not as a superior officer but as someone with experiences to share. Marcus told his story, not just about the Battle of Europa, but about the many times he had been stopped, questioned, and doubted despite his service and accomplishments. He described what it felt like to be treated as suspicious simply because of how he looked. He explained how exhausting it was to constantly prove his legitimacy. He also talked about the good officers he had encountered, the ones who treated him with respect and dignity, who asked questions before making assumptions, who recognized that their badge gave them power over people's lives and used that power responsibly. Those officers made a difference in their communities and earned genuine respect. The training session included interactive exercises. Officers worked in small groups to analyze scenarios and identify where biases might influence their decisions. They discussed strategies for slowing down their thought processes and gathering more information before acting. Some officers engaged enthusiastically. Others participated reluctantly, but they all participated. One officer named Rick challenged the premise of the training. He said that police had to make quick decisions in dangerous situations. They did not always have time to gather extensive information or question their assumptions. Sometimes snap judgments were necessary for safety. Danny acknowledged this was true. There were situations where officers had to act quickly, but he argued that most interactions were not high-stress emergencies. Even in urgent situations, officers could develop habits that helped them make better decisions under pressure. Training the mind to recognize bias helped even when time was limited. Marcus added that military personnel faced similar challenges in combat. They had to make life and death decisions with incomplete information, but good training helped them avoid mistakes. The same principle applied to policing. Training and awareness improved outcomes even in difficult circumstances. Over the following months, Danny conducted training sessions throughout the department. He also spoke at community forums and schools. He shared his story repeatedly, using his mistake as a teaching tool. It was uncomfortable to publicly acknowledge his failures, but he knew it was necessary. At one high school assembly, a student asked Danny if he had really changed or if he was just saying what people wanted to hear. The question was blunt but fair. Danny thought carefully before answering. He said that change was ongoing, not something that happened once and was finished. He still caught himself making assumptions and had to consciously correct his thinking. The difference was that now he was aware and actively working to do better. Marcus continued to be involved in Danny's work. They visited community centers and veteran organizations together. They co-presented at police training academies in other cities. Their partnership became a model for how people could work together across different backgrounds and experiences to create positive change. The media coverage that had been so negative initially began to shift. Stories appeared about the training program and the reforms it had inspired. Danny and Marcus were interviewed about their work together. While some people remained critical of Danny, others praised his willingness to face his mistakes and work toward solutions. 1 year after the initial incident, the city held a ceremony recognizing progress in police-community relations. The ceremony took place at the same Veterans Memorial Plaza where Marcus had been scheduled to speak on the day of his arrest. This time both Danny and Marcus were on the stage together. The mayor spoke about the importance of accountability and growth. She acknowledged that one incident had sparked broader conversations about policing and bias. She praised both Danny for his willingness to learn and Marcus for his grace in turning a negative experience into an opportunity for education. When it was Danny's turn to speak, he looked out at the crowd. He saw community leaders he had met over the past year. He saw fellow officers, some who supported his work and some who still had doubts. He saw students from schools where he had spoken, and he saw the faces of veterans who had shared their stories with him. He began by acknowledging that 1 year was not enough time to declare victory. The work of building trust and addressing bias was ongoing, but progress had been made. Officers were asking more questions and making fewer assumptions. Communities were seeing some improvements in how they were treated. Conversations that had been difficult were now happening regularly. Danny thanked Marcus publicly for his patience and his willingness to invest time in education rather than simply seeking punishment. He said that Marcus's example of grace under pressure had taught him more than any classroom lesson could. He committed to continuing the work for as long as he remained in law enforcement. Marcus spoke last. He talked about the importance of both accountability and forgiveness. He said that people make mistakes, but what matters is how they respond. Danny had responded by being honest about his failures and working hard to change. That deserved recognition even while acknowledging the harm that had been done. He also emphasized that the work could not stop with one person or one department. Every institution needed to examine its practices and address bias wherever it existed. Every individual needed to question their assumptions and work toward fairness. The goal was not perfection, which was impossible, but continuous improvement, which was always possible. After the ceremony, people gathered in small groups talking. Danny noticed a young black man in a police academy uniform approaching. The young man introduced himself as Jerome's brother. He said that Jerome had encouraged him to join the police department after seeing the changes that were happening. He wanted to be part of creating a better system. Danny was moved by this. The fact that someone from a community that had been hurt by policing would choose to join the force suggested that trust was beginning to rebuild. It would take time and sustained effort, but change was possible. Marcus stood nearby talking with General Hayes and other veterans. He caught Danny's eye and nodded. In that simple gesture was acknowledgement of how far they had both come. A year ago, they had been on opposite sides of a painful incident. Now they were partners in working toward justice and understanding. Danny knew that he would carry the lesson of that day for the rest of his life. The day he saw a decorated uniform and assumed fraud instead of heroism. The day his biases led him to handcuff a man who deserved honor and respect. But he would also carry the lessons that followed. The patience Marcus showed him. The stories of veterans who trusted him with their experiences. The growth that came from facing uncomfortable truths. As the sun set over the plaza and people began to leave, Danny felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that despite the mistakes of the past, a better future was possible. Hope that people could change and institutions could improve. Hope that the work he and Marcus were doing would make a difference for others. The Medal of Honor still hung on Marcus's chest, catching the last rays of sunlight. It represented sacrifice and heroism, but now to Danny it also represented something else, the possibility of redemption, the power of grace, the importance of seeing people for who they truly are rather than who we assume them to be, and the reminder that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of how they look or where they come from.